The Legend of Zelda is one of my favorite game series of all time, and while I love each and every one of the 3D games, I haven't played some of these in years. Because of that, I set out to replay all the 3D Zelda games in 2026 to see how they held up. Some were exactly what I remembered, and a couple I came out of feeling differently about than when I went in. Not always in the direction I expected, so let's get into it. The first 3D Zelda was of course the legendary Ocarina of Time, which I first played on my 3DS when I was like 12 or 13, and later on the Wii U Virtual Console. This has always been a top Zelda game for me, but will it still be after my replay? So going into this game initially, I knew Sheik was Zelda. I knew Ganondorf was the guy on the horse in the opening nightmare. I knew the Water Temple had a reputation worse than the average 2016 drama YouTuber. None of that really affected my experience the first time I played this, because I got hooked anyway. But this video isn't about that, it's about what it's like coming back to it now. You start as a kid in Kokiri Forest with no fairy while everyone around you has one, and Link is already on the outside of something before you've done anything. Then you get Navi, deal with the annoying kid blocking your path. I hate you. You meet the Great Deku Tree and go inside him, Ayo. And by the time you walk out into Hyrule Fields for the first time, you already know how to think about this world, and nobody calls you on the phone giving quippy remarks explaining every step to you like you're 5. The child dungeons get underrated because everyone fixates on the adult half, but those first 3 actually do matter. The Great Deku Tree eases you in and then ends with a giant spider dropping from the ceiling. Just something about the first time I saw it still sticks in my memory. Also, there's a really cool Lego set of this. Dodongo's Cavern teaches you to use bombs not just for walls, but for manipulating enemies, and the dungeon just keeps building on that. And then Jabu's Belly is the weird one that people love or hate entirely based on how they feel about navigating the inside of a giant fish with a fish girl who won't move without you picking her up. Also, the music in there is actually horrifying. These wet, low stomach sounds that just sound horrible. Yeah, this was something I was not looking forward to, but I know there are definitely people who are into playing this for some reason. Then for the time skip, you pull the Master Sword, Rauru puts you to sleep for 7 years, and you wake up as an adult. Castletown as you knew it is gone. The market that had people running between stalls, music playing, a guard you could bribe for 20 rupees, now dark and dead, full of redeads shuffling through empty streets. The redeads are easy enough to avoid, you just run past them. I mean, that's the whole strategy. It's just that they do this. The streets you were standing in an hour ago look exactly the same and feel completely wrong, and what really makes it stand out and feel completely wrong is that the game gave you enough time in the child section to actually care about what Hyrule looked like before, and care about some of the people there, like you've already met Zelda at this point. Also, something I didn't even want to have to bring up was just the stealth section sneaking into the castle. It's a very small part of the game, but I still do not like it, and I was not looking forward to that. Anyway, 7 years passed and everything fell apart, and you were asleep for all of it. That would be like being in a coma since 2019 and waking up now to find everything just got worse. Honestly, wouldn't be too far off. I paid more attention to the specifics of adult Hyrule than I had before. What changed, what survived, what the gap actually cost. Kakariko Village grew from a quiet settlement into a refugee town. Lake Hylia partially dried out. Lon Lon Ranch, where Malon used to live, is now run by Ingo after Ganondorf handed it to him as a reward. And to get Epona, you have to challenge Ingo to a horse race and beat him twice while he tries to lock you inside the ranch. I also want to mention Darunia, because the moment he refuses to take you seriously and then immediately launches into what I can only describe as a full body celebration the second you play the right song in him is just one of my favorite 10 seconds in any game. Here's where the replay really starts to get complicated though. The music and sound design in this game are still remarkable. The Forest Temple's ominous sound, the Shadow Temple's distant scraping, the way each dungeon sounds completely different from the last. Half the reason these dungeons feel the way they do is the audio, and while they do get mentioned when people talk about it, as a video game aficionado, if you could tell, who may or may not have awful opinions on music, it is something I really pay a lot of attention to. And while most dungeon tracks aren't tunes I would listen to in the gym, they really do match the areas perfectly. But going back to the dungeons with everything memorized, the mystery disappears fast. I knew which rooms the boss key was in before I walked through the door of the Forest Temple. You end up just running the sequence you've already memorized. And honestly, it was kind of weird when I was playing through these dungeons, and part of me didn't know where to go, but it's kind of like it was just so ingrained in my head that it was just guiding me on where to go when I started to get lost. That said, the adult dungeons are still great and some of the best in the series. The Forest Temple is a rotting mansion with dead vines, hallways that twist back on themselves, and trees growing through the floor. You feel slightly lost even when you're not, and it of course does that on purpose. Shadow Temple is one of the most unsettling spaces the series has produced. The dead hands grabbing you, the ferry crossing pitch black water with things moving underneath it, Bongo Bongo, a floating body using 2 detached heads to attack you while you shoot out its side to stun it, fighting you on a drum that keeps bouncing you off your feet. It is one of the weirder bosses in the series, but I do like it. Even knowing all of it was coming, the dungeon still hits you way harder than you'd think. Then the Spirit Temple, which isn't my favorite dungeon in the game, but one of my favorite concepts in the game. It's like 2 completely different dungeons stitched together in the same building. Child sections use the boomerang and slingshot, adult sections use the mirror shield and long shot, And some adult-sized puzzles only make sense if you understand what you did as a child in the same room. I think it's one of the most interesting dungeons in the game, if I'm being honest. I'd say the one thing that really caught me off guard negatively was the combat. Once you understand Zeke targeting, which is like immediately, most fights are the same loop. Lock on, circle, wait for their window, hit it. Most enemies just stand there waiting for you to find that window. The bosses show it most clearly, like a lot of them terrified me the first time, but once you know the item gimmick, the fight's basically over. Queen Goma's an easy fight, King Dodongo doesn't take much longer. And the camera, which the 3DS version does help, is still kind of cagey in tighter indoor spaces. There's corridors in the Shadow Temple where it just starts doing its own thing. The dungeon design is excellent. Combat and camera are the parts that have probably aged the most. Also, before you have Epona, crossing Hyrule Field takes a long time, like way longer than it should. Getting Epona changes everything, but before that you're just running more than Forrest Gump. The gold Skulltulas are a side activity I was happy to mostly ignore. You collect 100 hidden spiders scattered across the world for rewards at a cursed family's house in Kakariko. I found the ones I stumbled across and forgot about the rest, and I just was never really motivated to find them. If you're a completionist, it's not like it's unfair or as crazy as the Korok seeds or anything, but even the first time I played this, it's just never something I tried to complete. The Gerudo Fortress is worth mention for also being one of the weirder segments in any Zelda game, and we would see weirdness like this come back in another game very similarly. You infiltrate a thief's fortress, you get caught, you get thrown in prison, escape, do it again. And the stealth segment I do actually like a lot better than the one in Hyrule Castle. I think it goes on a little longer than it should have, and I definitely did start to get tired of it towards the end. But I do have to say it is one of my favorite stealth segments in the series. The Song of Storms paradox is one of my favorite things in the game, and I'm bringing it up even though it's not central to anything because it's cool. And by not being central, I mean just the paradox of it. So adult Link is in a windmill and the operator is furious because years ago a kid came in and played a song that drained the well. He teaches you the Song of Storms out of spite, that you go back in time as child Link, walk into the windmill, play the Song of Storms, and drain the well. The song exists because you played it. You played it because he taught it to you, and he taught it to you because you played it. There's no origin point, and this is a very famous paradox, and I don't know, I always just love stuff like this in games and movies. Shout out Interstellar, Donnie Darko, and other movies that have this twist. Now, of course, we have to talk about the Water Temple, which you'll usually find people on one of two sides about. One is this, and the other is someone telling you it's secretly one of the best dungeons ever, and you're a LARPer if you hate it as he tips his fedora. So the reputation mostly comes from the Iron Boots on the Nintendo 64, where you open the equipment menu every 30 seconds. Now, while the 3DS version was the first one I played, I have played the N64 version on Wii U Virtual Console, and yeah, it's rough. On 3DS though, the boots are on a quick select button and the whole problem disappears. What you're left with is a coherent dungeon about managing water levels in a central tower with the Dark Link fight alone in a completely empty room. One of my favorite fights in the game, by the way. So I still don't think it's great. It is kind of annoying managing the water levels, and this one still confused me to this day. I think it's probably better than its reputation though, especially on the 3DS version. Like, it's probably not going to win any awards for best dungeon, but it isn't that bad on 3DS. And while I think it is one of the biggest flaws, I think that's just because this game doesn't have too many glaring issues. So the ending of this game surprised me initially, and it still hits hard, especially if you have too much knowledge on the Zelda timeline like me to really understand the implications of how Nintendo Capcom descending to make the timeline sort of kind of makes sense, not really. So I can make a whole multi-hour video going over every little detail in this game, but there's like 500 videos doing that exact same thing, which is why I wanted to make the game's recap briefer and just try to focus on some key moments and gameplay mechanics. It's honestly even better now for me because I couldn't really appreciate some aspects of this as a kid. Link's story of going from a 10-year-old kid living a seemingly normal life to losing his entire childhood and being tasked with saving the world, it's a lot harder when you're actually an adult yourself playing it. You also just appreciate and notice more of the differences in the world and the design of the dungeons and just everything else around it. Really, the only thing holding it back are the N64 era quirks that are still around on the 3DS version, which I do believe to be the definitive version. You don't have free camera movement, which means it can be janky, and the combat, while fine, is much simpler than what we would see later. And there are still many tedious parts. I know there's a lot of people who are really against a remake happening, which is looking more likely now that we saw a new Star Fox game, which was in the same league. But you know what? I'm all for it. It's the kind of game that's hard to put into words what makes it so special, and the only real drawbacks for me are the aged visuals, the clunky controls, and simplified combat. But I don't think any of that really brings it down much. It'd just be cool to see this reimagined with more modern design, at least the good parts of modern design. You know, replaying all these games for videos is really time consuming, and it's led to me getting a lot less sleep than I really want. Luckily, I've been using products by the sponsor of this video, Man Asleep, which has helped me get a better night's sleep. They recently sent me their Cool Sleep Mask, Pro Sleep Mask, and the White Noise Machine, and Mrs. Domaney and I have both started using these products every night. I've been using the Cool Sleep Mask as summer is approaching, and it's easy to get hot, and this cools you down, and she's been using the Pro, and it's been a game changer. They're lightweight, extremely adjustable to the point where you can even move the actual cups to fit your eyes perfectly and completely black out any light. Also, I cannot rave enough about the White Noise Machine. I've never slept with white noise before until this, but now I use it along with the mask every night. You just plug it in and can put the remote next to your bed so you can turn it on and off whenever, as well as adjust the volume and sound. My personal favorite sound is the rain sound effect. Seriously, if you're like me and have had trouble sleeping and want to have a healthier amount of sleep, I highly recommend Mana Sleep. Check them out in the link in the description and use code DOMAINY for 10% off at checkout. Thank you for Mana Sleep for sponsoring this video. Now let's get to the next game. So Majora's Mask 3D is actually very special to me. It's the first Zelda game I got on launch day, and I was only 12 years old at the time. I'd played Wind Waker the year before and liked it, but I didn't understand yet how much I was going to care about this series. Majora's Mask showed me how big of a Zelda fan I was going to become, because while I loved Wind Waker, and I'll get to that next, that was just one game. I became obsessed with this game, and it made me wish that I would have played some of these games earlier in my life. This is around the time I started learning a lot more about Nintendo. As someone who was always just a big Mario fan since I was 4, I had limited experience with some of the other series, but I was friends with people this time who were big Zelda fans, and I gotta say that the hype was deserved. So I haven't played this game for a long time, so going into this video I was actually pretty nervous, because the last thing I wanted was to like this less in my replay. So anyway, of course you're Link here, you're riding through a forest looking for Navi after Ocarina of Time. Skullkid ambushes you and steals your horse and your ocarina, and then curses you into a Deku Scrub and runs. You chase him into a strange world called Termina, or Termina if you pronounce it that way, where a giant moon with a face is falling towards the ground. You have 3 days, which doesn't seem like a lot of time, but it's far more than Wesker gives you. And in those 3 days, you have to find a way to prevent the moon from crashing into the world and destroying everything. You can reset to day 1 by playing the Song of Time, but most of what you collected resets with you. The moon having a face is just always something that disturbed me as a kid. It just looks wrong, just too expressive. It's like you look up at the moon and the moon looks back at you. For the first few hours, it's just there in the background whenever you're outside, getting slightly bigger every time. By the 3rd day, the sky is mostly moon. And the first time I played this when the moon first crashed into Termina, I was actually shocked. Like, I didn't know if I did something wrong. Anyway, Skullkid doesn't get enough credit for why the game actually hurts here, because he's not a villain with a plan. He's not Ganondorf. He's just a kid who felt abandoned by the people he loved and started acting out, and then found a mask that amplified everything dark in him until he wasn't really himself anymore. So basically just Spider-Man 3. The backstory with the 4 giants, former friends he thinks just left him when they grew up and moved on, turns what looks like an apocalypse into something more like a terrible breakup. Just very interesting to have a more sympathetic villain here. In this replay, when I understood him more, it does feel a lot different, because I hated Skullkid the first time I played this. So I've never seen another game do what the 3-day cycle does here. Everyone in Termina has a schedule, a life they're living while the moon gets bigger overhead. The postman completely loses it trying to decide whether his duty to deliver mail matters more than surviving. Andrew and Kathy are trying to hold a wedding before the world ends. No one leaves because they don't really have anywhere to go. They just keep going. There's a man in Clocktown who spends all 3 days trying to sell a lottery ticket for a prize he'll never get to spend, and he's there every cycle. Every time you reset, he goes back to a spot and starts pitching again. I don't even know what to do with that information, honestly. Playing it through with the whole thing memorized, the pressure doesn't hit the same way it did at 12, but replaces it a stranger. You already know these people. You know that Andrew's gonna wait. You know the postman's gonna panic. You move through their last days knowing you're going to fix it this time, and the whole thing shifted from a race against the clock to something closer to grief. So even when I first played this, I knew about the theory that this game represents the 5 stages of grief, but I didn't really pick up on it until I actually replayed it. And I gotta say, it makes a lot of sense, and if you want to watch a full video on this, there's plenty of them. But in short, you see people deny it, get angry, and then just start to accept it. And it makes these characters feel a lot more human than characters we're still seeing in the series nowadays. A quick note I want to mention is that I have played the N64 version through Virtual Console, but I've never actually played this on an original N64 system. And the reason that matters is because it's much easier to lose everything since your last save in this, so there's more pressure if you played it that way. If you played the 3DS remaster / remake, whatever you want to call it, any Virtual Console version, or the NSO version, it's a lot less punishing here. And especially on the NSO version, where you can replay your gameplay. I'm not one to tell people how to play their game, but all I can recommend to make this, in my opinion, a better experience is to just avoid using that. Like I mentioned, the Andrew and Kathy quests still get me. The Bomber's Notebook turns Majora's Mask into the world's most stressful planner, because you're tracking a ton of information, and this is something I think is better on the 3DS version. You gotta know who's gonna be where, when, and just a bunch of details like that. If you miss one step, then the thread breaks and you start over. I know this from experience because this was brutal as a kid, and I was still not perfect at it now. The mask system comes back from Ocarina of Time, but as we know, it is far more expansive here. Instead of just having masks that give you some sort of small power, which of course are in this game and there's a lot of them, I'm talking about the transformation mask. Of course you start as Deku Link, who's the weakest form by far, but Woodfall Temple uses it well enough to justify its existence. You skip across lily pads, shoot bubbles at switches navigating the poison swamp. Goron Link, who's my favorite, rolls at full speed and punches hard enough that you forget that you could play as normal Link, and so a temple is built around that. You just punch through layers of floor in a frozen tower. Zora Link swims fast and uses his fins as blades, which makes the water section feel more powerful instead of slow like in Ocarina of Time. And all 3 forms belong to dead people, their faces, and it is kind of disturbing when you really think about it. Then there's of course the Fierce Deity mask, and that just makes you completely OP. Now this game has some incredible music. music, one of my favorite OSTs in video game history, and that pretty much goes for all the Zelda games, but the one that sticks with me the most is the Song of Healing. Besides being a beautiful piano track, you play it for a dying Zora, so he can go out peacefully, and then he becomes a mask you can wear, and this was something that I thought about a lot when playing it for the first time, and I still think a lot about now. I'm not saying I think about it every day, that's reserved for questioning the decisions made in 500 Days of Summer, but it is something that every single person who's played this game will remember, or probably, maybe you were watching TikTok or something while playing this. So how about the dungeons? Stone Temple Pilot's Temple is one of my favorite Zelda dungeons. You walk through a massive structure, figuring out its logic, and then you shoot a beam of light and it flips upside down. So the ceiling is the floor. Puzzles that made no sense from one angle click into place from the other. And I don't know, I just really love that concept. So like with Ocarina of Time, the most controversial dungeon here is the Water Temple, which is the Great Bay Temple here. And the complaint is that rerouting water through pipes is confusing and slow. And yes, the first time through it is, and yeah, the second time through it is too. The dungeon wants you to redirect water through a system of pipes and valves across 3 floors, and if you don't understand it, it feels random. But there's a central current that Zora Link can swim against or with, and once you understand how it connects, the dungeon does get a lot more coherent, but still, it can be very disorienting, and all the rooms look very similar, so it is very easy to get lost. Like I mentioned, I played the 3DS version of this for the replay, and I feel that's more significant here, because unlike the other remasters, this one is probably the one that's most seen as a downgrade. Now, there are good changes. The visuals are cleaner, the Bomber's Notebook's more readable, the Song of Double Time lets you skip to a specific hour instead of jumping forward by half a day, but there was a couple things broke, and the big one is Zora Link swimming. The swimming is just more restrictive, Deku Link feels slower, the game's aesthetic has been criticized, the difficulty's lowered, there's less challenges, but the point is there's a lot of problems people have with this. I think Ocarina of Time is the better game, but I think Majora's Mask is a lot deeper. Like, you'll think about the events and themes here more than Ocarina. The mask, mainly the Goron mask, are a ton of fun to use and add a ton of variety. The world of Tomina is really something to explore, and the side quests here are the best in the series. Then of course the characters are just a lot better here. It does struggle from the same technical issues as its predecessor on both versions, and I know the 3DS version is seen as inferior, but these are still both very valid ways to play it, and I know someone's commenting now about how the 3DS version is not valid, but to each their own. And while I appreciate the concept of having the 3-day cycle, and it is incredibly creative, it's just never personally been my favorite thing. Now, it wasn't as stressful now since I have more stressful things like work and waiting for the Resident Evil amiibo to drop so I can buy them before they sell it forever, but it still does put you on edge, and it just does come down if you prefer that style or if you prefer more time to breathe in an adventure game. The dungeons here, for the most part, are also pretty great. Really, outside the Great Bay Temple, I really love them all. But when I say them all, I mean the 3 other dungeons. There's only 4 dungeons here, so that is a bit of a knock on the game when Ocarina had a lot. For what Majora's Mask does lack in dungeons, it makes up in world design and atmosphere. And I know a lot of people have this as their favorite Zelda game, and that's completely understandable. Wind Waker was my first Zelda game, and at 11, I had no idea what the series was supposed to be, so I was lost constantly. I sailed in the wrong direction for so long that I was just finding stuff I probably wasn't supposed to find until later. I remember how long it took me to get past Forsaken Fortress, and it's still not my favorite part of the game, but there's always something I liked about just sailing the ocean, the art style, the music to go along with it. I loved every second of this game. Well, not exactly. Wind Waker takes place after the Great Sea flooded all of Hyrule. No Hyrule Field, no Death Mountain, just ocean in every direction. The world's just a grid of squares, and your job is to sail between them, explore the islands, and figure out what happened to a kingdom that no longer exists above the water. Your job is just to sail between them, explore the islands, and rescue your sister. Link doesn't start as the chosen hero, he's just a regular kid from Outset Island whose sister gets taken by a giant bird. It doesn't seem like there's a prophecy waiting for him, it's just a kid who wants his sister back. Coming back to it, knowing the map, knowing most of the islands, Wind Waker aged better than I was expecting. And for this replay, I did play Wind Waker HD on the Wii U. Like I said, the cell shading still looks great on the Wii U version, while realistic games from the same era just don't, because they have that melted plastic look, and the colors all just look so drained.
What is that?
I also really love the expressive animation. The sailing is probably the most debated part of the game. Some people really love it, some people think it's tedious, but let's talk about it a little more. I really paid attention here just to see how it felt, and things will change depending on weather and time of day, and it just makes it feel less repetitive. Like, this is a real world you're living in. The wind also will blow different directions, and you can of course change it, and you're gonna be doing this a lot. Like, it gets a little repetitive. You're not getting Sea of Thieves level boat simulation here or anything, but the sailing still feels perfectly fine, and it is still a great feeling when you discover something. The first time you play Wind Waker, every island feels like it could have something incredible. You don't know what's out there, so everything is potential. Knowing the map already, you can see which islands matter and which ones are the 50 rupee chest, and the whole exploration shifts. The ocean is still beautiful, but it did stop being a little mysterious for me. There were of course some smaller things that I didn't find in my first playthrough or that I forgot about, but I was a lot more patient with the sailing when I first played this, trying to discover everything, than now when I already knew where everything was, and the sailing just kind of felt like a means to an end. Perhaps the biggest flaw in this game is the Triforce Hunt. So this is in the back half of the game, and the original has you getting charts deciphered by Tingle for absurd amounts of rupees and selling to separate squares to raise the shards. It's just padding from dungeons that got cut basically, but the HD version does cut this down dramatically, and the back half moves completely differently for it. Anyone who has played the GameCube original and hasn't gone back doesn't know how much that one change fixes things. Still not my favorite part of the game, but it is much better here. Speaking of dungeons though, Dragon Roost Cavern has a room about halfway through where a bokoblin is hanging from a rope over a lava pit and you have to swing across to reach him. And it's just goofy things like this in this game that I really appreciate and that just really help give this game a distinct personality. Like, that does not feel like something that would be in Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask. The dungeons here just have a very distinct vibe, and they don't feel as eerie as the previous games. But they still have the basic formula where you find keys, you find an item to progress, and then you find a boss at the end. But when I say they're not all oppressive, I'd say the Earth Temple is one that surprised me most. It is dark, it's oppressive, it's completely at odds with the bright ocean outside. You have the mirror shield bouncing light through fog, and there's also a subplot about Azora Sage, Laruto, and the game doesn't warn you it's coming. Wind Temple kind of has a similar feeling with Makar, a small violin playing Korok you have to escort through the whole thing, and I feel the same way about this as I feel about most escort missions in general, which is that I want the option to leave. There's also only 6 dungeons here, so more than Majora's Mask, but less than Ocarina of Time. I think the game could have used another 2, I think 8 would have been a good number here, but the dungeons here all feel distinct enough. Now, major spoiler, even though there's been other major spoilers in this video, is when Tetra turns out to be Zelda, even though you probably could have predicted it coming, it is still a cool reveal, and it's very different from the Zelda we've seen in previous games. Then we also have to talk about Ganondorf here, because while the other iterations of Ganondorf have just been this menacing beast who's just cartoonishly evil, this version's a little different. Don't get me wrong, he's still menacing, he's still evil, but he feels a lot more grounded here. Like, he doesn't feel as over the top, he feels even more human sometimes. He has a chance to defeat Link early on and doesn't, and I feel like it was just a very interesting direction to take this character. Now, how about the gameplay itself? Because I've went over a lot of things, but I haven't went over the actual gameplay. The combat here for me was better than the previous 2 3D games. You have more fluid movement, you have more options, the controls just feel more responsive, the camera doesn't fight against you, and it has a more relaxing vibe than Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask that feel a lot more stressful. Maybe it's just the art style, maybe it's the music, maybe it's a mix of both, but it is a really beautiful game. Now, I've thought a lot about what this replay meant for me, because I have not played this game in years, and there are some things that after you play it the first time lose its magic, like a lot of the exploration, but that can be said about most of the other games. The story and reveals itself, some of the more tedious parts, like the Triforce shards, like seemingly need to change the wind just every few minutes, but I also still really love this game. It doesn't feel like one big connected land, but it kind of feels like just separate civilizations just within the same world. I also do like how you have to go back to different islands sometimes, like when you have to go back to Outset, which was the starting island, and then you just see your grandma and she's just not even interacting with you because she's so heartbroken from your sister getting kidnapped and then you leaving. So my takeaway here is that I think it drops more after my replay compared to how much the previous 2 games dropped after my replay, meaning the enjoyment I got from it, but it's going to be like that for any game, and I still think this is a fantastic game that if you have not played, you have to. Now, this isn't the easiest one because you have to have a Wii U to play the HD version, and not many people have Wii U's, and if you do have a Wii U and don't have this, the game is not cheap, but if you have a Switch 2 or a GameCube, you can still play this. This is my 3rd time through Twilight Princess. I played when Twilight Princess HD launched in 2016, again in 2020, and now this. What I can tell you is that by the 3rd time you have herded those goats, you are extremely aware that you have herded them before. The Ordon village opening is long. You herd goats, you fish with a stick, you chase a cat, you practice sword moves on a scarecrow, you go to bed, wake up, brush your teeth, you know, all these things. It does work the first time when the twilight rolls in and the kids disappear. By the 3rd playthrough though, I was just on autopilot. Mallow was staring at me from his doorway and I just felt judged. However, once the game starts, it is one of the best things Nintendo's ever made. Do I wish there was a way to make the opening go a little faster? Yeah, but this game has a lot of dialogue, so you're just gonna have to be mashing A. But don't get me wrong, the opening village, if you haven't played it before, is not bad. At least not fully. It is slow paced, but you start to care about the characters around Link. You learn a little more about him and the village, and then you get the surreal horror of the first Twilight section. It's just the washed out world, the silent monsters dragging people. It's a complete contrast from Wind Waker, which was a contrast from the previous game. So some of these Twilight sections bothered me more than they did. So let's talk about these Twilight sections with Wolf Link. You have the washed out palettes, you have the spirits you can suddenly see moving through a world that can't see them. You can see souls, you can hear animals talking, but Wolf Link's combat barely changes across the whole game. Like, Link as a human is constantly getting sword skills, new items, new approaches, but as Wolf Link, it's pretty much the same thing, and I don't think it's particularly that fun. Like, it feels like all the Wolf Link sections just tie into each other, like there's not really any progression, and it kind of just slows down the pacing. Now, I don't think it's a bad thing to slow down every now and then. I don't mean it in the sense that these sections are just necessarily slow, but it just kind of feels like that. And yeah, that's very subjective, and I don't really know how to explain it, but these are the parts I was kind of looking forward to the least, and they really didn't pick up much for me. And also, Twilight Princess also loves stopping for its own momentum for gimmick sections. Like, there's a cannon escort across the bridge, there's a snowboarding section, there's a carriage escort. None of these are bad on their own, and yeah, they kind of interrupt the rhythm of the game, but you know what? I like these. I just think it adds personality. I just think it's something silly to contrast with the more serious tone of this game, and none of them are that long. Now, when it comes to Twilight Princess, I've said before in other videos that this maybe has the best dungeons in the series, or at least one of them. Something like the Arbiter's Grounds gives you the spinner, which is one of my favorite items. It's a giant top that rides special wall rails through the dungeon at speed, And the reason I say through the dungeon and not in general is because you use this like 2 times after the dungeon. The Stallard boss uses this brilliantly. It's one of my favorite boss fights in the series. Like, the spinner item is just awesome, but then the game kind of just throws it away and there's not really any creative uses after this. Snow Peak Ruins is another one of my favorites, so it's not unheard of for there to be a cold or ice dungeon in a Zelda game. It's pretty common. This is probably my favorite version of that. You're in a frozen mansion owned by 2 Yetis named Yetta and Yeto, and Yeto is trying to gather ingredients for a soup that'll keep the cold at bay. The dungeon quest is basically just finding stuff for it and the mirror fragments at the end. The Yetis are very charming, but then you start to understand why you keep getting sent to the wrong room, and it hits a lot harder than it should. I think my favorite here, or at least one of my favorites, has gotta be City in the Sky. You use the cannon to get into the sky, and you get the double claw shots, which let you swing between platforms, and it's also just such a unique idea for a Zelda dungeon. And it may not seem that way because we've now had 2 games that go into the sky, but it just felt like this abandoned civilization that hadn't been touched for millennia, thousands of feet above the ground. And the last one I want to talk about, because I don't want to go over every single dungeon here, is Temple of Time. You use the Dominion Rod to control a statue and move it through the dungeon. You weigh down switches, you route it back to the rooms you already crossed, and then the Dark Nut fight at the end is just one of my favorites. The back half dungeon quality is generally some of the best in the series, but it also makes the gap more obvious. The overworld exploration is nowhere near as rewarding as what's inside the dungeons. There's pull souls, heart pieces in predictable spots, a few howling stones that teach you songs. None of it comes close to what the dungeon is doing, but that doesn't mean it's bad. The overworld here is solid, but it basically just feels like a bigger version of Ocarina of Time. Like, of course, Ocarina of Time is the first time you explore Hyrule in 3D, Majora's Mask has a completely different world, and then Wind Waker just has the worlds flooded, and this is very much supposed to be follow-up to Ocarina of Time / Majora's Mask, so it does make sense. And I gotta say that the music in Hyrule Field is just amazing. Midna is maybe the best companion in any Zelda game, and it comes down to the arc. She opens the game completely upfront about using you, rides you around as a wolf, admits she's only helping you because she needs to, makes fun of you constantly. Then across who knows how many hours I put into this, and you just start to notice some things. You find out the truth about Midna, and you even have to rush to save her. And I know I kind of said that the Wolfling sections weren't great, but this section is fantastic and full of stress. And I mean that in a good way for a video game. The final Ganondorf sequence is maybe the best ending this series has produced. 4 fights where this possessed Zelda, Beast Ganon, a horseback battle across Hyrule Field, then just a one-on-one sword duel, and the duel is the best of all of them. Remember, Ganondorf was banished to the Twilight Realm before this, so he really wants revenge, but you don't let him get it. Alright, so I already got to the ending, but you might be thinking, I didn't talk about the combat much, I didn't talk about what the actual gameplay is like, and that's just because it feels really seamless. At this point in the series, this is the best combat we've had. It just feels very fluid. You have Link trying to aura farm with some of his sword moves, you have Epona, you get most of the traditional Zelda items, and the game of course goes for that very dark feel, like it's trying to be Majora's Mask, but it doesn't really reach the same heights, and it just feels like another great 3D Zelda game. It doesn't feel as experimental as some other things, but you also don't need a game to be super experimental. It kind of just tries to build off the formula, while adding a lot more NPCs, expanding on different locations that have changed over the time, and this one seems to be controversial for some reason, and I'm not really sure why. Like, I see people saying it's their favorite, and I see people saying that they hate it, but overall it has great dungeon design, great overworld, fantastic music, and besides the Wolfling sections kind of dragging the pacing a little bit, and the opening section which takes a little longer than you'd like, I really enjoyed my replay here. I went into this one expecting to come out with mostly the same opinion I had going in, and mostly that's what happened. A few things changed though. So to be clear, I replayed this through the Switch HD remaster, and it is a big improvement. Button controls fixed the motion reliability problem. On Wii, a Girahim fight where the game misread 2 inputs and you watch a Link swing the wrong direction is just infuriating. On Switch, the controls work better, but they are still far from perfect. You move the right stick and it still feels a little off, and I haven't fully gotten used to it. Fi, or Fi, and I say this in every video because people always correct me no matter which one I say, who of course is the sword spirit who used to interrupt you constantly to report that your batteries were low or that the door in front of you might have something behind it. It got toned down in the Switch version, so we're already off to a good start. The stamina gauge is one of those things that doesn't really get talked about enough when people list this game's problems. You have a wheel that depletes when you sprint, charge attacks, or climb, and running out mid-climb and sliding back down a wall can be very frustrating, and it would be frustrating in a couple future games. The item upgrade system compounds this early on because you're collecting materials from grass and ore deposits to upgrade equipment, which just feels like homework because it's just not that fun here. Then there's shield durability, and yeah, the more I talk about this, the more it really makes sense why a lot of decisions were made in Breath of the Wild. And trust me, Breath of the Wild got a lot of complaints about the same things, but I think they're arguably worse here. Like, I guess at least Breath of the Wild has more variety in shields, so you can change things up. Anyway, let's go back to the beginning where you start in Skyloft. So I gotta say, it is a great starting area. It's one of my favorite in the series. And something I've always loved about this is that it's the start of the Zelda timeline. I don't know, I always just like trying to connect the lore in these games, and it's just cool to me that this is the beginning of the story. We see the world when they were still in the sky, and beyond that, this game actually has a really great story, and some of the best iterations of these characters. Like, Zelda here actually feels like a person. You've known her your whole life, and you get to spend some time with her before anything really happens in the game. Then of course there's the fan favorite Groose. As a tutorial, it's not anything special, but I don't think it was that bad either. It teaches you the basics, introduces you to some characters, and on a replay, of course, I was trying to go through it a little quickly, but I don't think it felt as drawn out as something like Twilight Princess. So you all know what happens where Zelda gets taken, you go to Faron Woods, and it feels like a real discovery just going to the surface because your whole life has been in the sky. And that's kind of the reason why this game is so linear, and it is by far the most linear 3D Zelda. Like, if you started with Breath of the Wild and then went to this game, you would think they're two completely different series. There's no overworld in the traditional sense, because you fly between isolated surface regions on your Skywing. Each one's sealed off and dense with content, and then you go back to each of them multiple times as the story demands. Compared to Ocarina of Time or Twilight Princess, or really any Zelda game before this, those all have connected spaces, but this has more like structured themed levels that you go back to. To its credit, that means there's a lot going on, and there's things I didn't notice in my first replay that I found here, like certain hidden chests, things like that, because it is fairly densely packed. But still, I've never been a fan of just going back to the same area multiple times like this when things don't really feel that different for the most part. The three major regions are Faron Woods, Elden Volcano, and Lanayru Desert, and each time you go back, you're going to have new objectives. There's a late game section where Faron floods and you have to collect musical notes. You have to just chase them around, and overall it doesn't take that long, but it just feels like it takes much longer than it does. Not gonna lie, I kind of forgot about this until my replay. Maybe the coolest part of this, though, is in Lanayru Desert. Scattered throughout the desert are time shift stones, which are crystals you strike with your sword that expand the bubble of time outward, reverting everything inside back to how it looked thousands of years ago. Dead machinery starts running, and dried water channels fill up, crumbled walls come back. The puzzles built around this are the best in the game. You're moving an activated stone through a room while keeping it in the range of the mechanisms you need running, or overlapping two stones bubbles to create a path through a space that only partially exists in any one area. Lanayru Mining Facility, the dungeon here, is probably my favorite in the game. That is an ancient cistern. I just think it's a really cool concept, and it's kind of like time travel in a way, where you're just reverting something to how it was, but it's not exactly time travel. And this was something I did not get bored of. Like, I loved it when I first played it, and honestly, I think I like it even better here. Then I also mentioned Ancient Cistern because it's one of the best dungeons in the series for me. It has a very unique Buddhist aesthetic, and doesn't even look like it's from a Zelda game at points. But then you go down to the basement, and then it's just completely different. It's dark, it's flooded, it looks like a different dungeon. The boss fight, the Koloktos, is just one of the best in the series, and it involves you ripping the boss's arms off and then beating him up with it. The whip is a super fun item to use. There's a reason so many people have made videos on this, some of which have even called it the best dungeon ever. And in a series like this, that's pretty good praise. And something when I was younger, when I played this, I didn't really appreciate the scenery as much here, but it is really beautiful, especially on the Switch version with the higher resolution. Besides the dungeons, I want to go back to the characters and specifically talk about the villains here. So one of the main villains who you fight a few times is Girahim, and besides being the most flamboyant villain in the series, his fights feel different each time. This kind of feels like a puzzle fight, and you really have to change up your strategy. You have to actually think about what attacks you're using instead of just using the right stick or swinging the Wii remote randomly. He's very theatrical, which most bosses are not in the Zelda series. And then the reveal about who he actually is a really great reveal. The fights aren't all good here though. The imprisoned fights here are probably my least favorite here. It's just running around a giant sealed creature, hacking at its toes to slow it down, climbing its back, driving a stake into the top of its head. And then you do it again with more health and a brief airborne phase, and then you do it again, and then it's just more dramatic. And then it just feels like you've just done this before. I think Skyward Sword's a very interesting game, because in some aspects it's the best Zelda. Like, you could argue this has the best story of a Zelda game, or at least one of them. You could argue it has some of the best dungeons, some of the best music, some of the best visuals, but how about the gameplay itself? I'm not a fan of the really segmented world or the control scheme, and those are two very major things in here. And at points, it kind of gets hard to appreciate some of the greatness of this game when I'm just getting annoyed by controls or just going back to the same area again and again. And for me, that really brings it down. Like, when I played this for the first time, I like the game, but I wasn't the biggest fan of it. But I feel like here I actually appreciate it a little more. I'm able to appreciate the designs, I'm able to appreciate the music more. I used to be really big into open world games, but as I've gotten older, I've actually started to prefer some more linear game design. So this is not a top tier Zelda for me, but I actually do appreciate it more, especially playing it now on Switch where the controls are just much better, even if they're not perfect. I also paid more attention to the characters. Demise is just an awesome villain, and of course the precursor to Ganon, which I think is a really cool concept. I think this game is still very flawed, but this replay actually did show me some more positives. I could totally get why someone wouldn't like this though. I've seen people rank this really low, and I've seen people rank it almost at number 1, and for me it's kind of in the middle there. I think it honestly just comes down to your preference in games. If you really hate the linear game design, you might not like this, but like I said, for me, I do prefer some linear game designs. I'm not saying I necessarily prefer linear games, and it definitely depends. Like for Zelda, I do like a more open style, but I really did have a lot of fun in this replay. I was 14 when this came out, and I got it on Switch launch day. I was hyped for this game for years, like literally since it was announced. That's around the time I was getting really big into Nintendo. I remember watching the Treehouse event where they revealed it. I remember watching the first trailer. So when we finally got a confirmation of what this game truly was, I was super hyped, because this was like nothing we had gotten in the series before. To this day, this may be the most hyped Nintendo game ever, just because it was coming at a time when the Wii U was just a colossal flop, and this game was hyped for years and delayed for years, and it was going to be the gateway into the new era of Nintendo, even though it was on the Wii U. But that didn't matter. The hype was through the roof, and when it finally came out, it did not disappoint me. So we gotta talk about the discovery first. You have your tutorial in the Great Plateau where you learn the basics, where you get some background on the story, and you get the runes in your glider. But even before that, just looking out into the world, just seeing how expansive this world was at the time, there's no game that I think has truly replicated that feeling for me. I was addicted to this game when it came out. I tried to find every shrine, I tried to get as many upgrades as I could because I wanted more stamina and I wanted more health. And sometimes I would just wander around and see what I could find, and usually I wouldn't go more than a few minutes without finding something of interest. Perhaps one of the most fun things here that was fun when I first played it and fun now is the physics, because you could do anything in this game pretty much. Like using stasis on a boulder, then you just keep hitting it and you go onto it and it just goes flying. Like that will never just not be fun. And I've just always liked the different ways to approach a situation. Do you want to go in stealthily? Do you want to use a bomb? Do you want to use arrows? Do you want to use your sword? And that variety kind of kept me playing for so long. So even on my replay, because I actually have never replayed this game until now, I still had a lot of fun trying out different things in each encounter. So speaking of encounters, the big thing is the weapon durability here. And this was one of the biggest gripes of the time, and I mean, it still is. Because I mean, your items will break easier than that one vase in Super Paper Mario. Now later on in the game, you do get the Master Sword, and that doesn't break, but it takes time to recharge. And it just got to a point where I felt like I wasn't even using my strongest weapons because I wanted to save them for boss fights. So in one way, it's kind of a negative, but in the other way, it does at least force you to experiment with different weapons, because if you have one strong sword that's going to last the entire game, you're not going to worry about picking something else up or trying something else out. It doesn't stop it from being annoying though, especially when it happens in the middle of a fight. And how about the shrines? So I'm not a completionist. There's only a few games I've ever actually 100%ed, and for some reason, one of them is Tales from the Borderlands. But I knew going into this, I was going to try to do a lot, but not everything, because there's like 1,000 Korok seeds or 900, however many there are in here, and that's what you use for upgrades. And I'm just going to say, on my replay, I didn't really go out of my way to find them. I just kind of ran into them because it's not something I wanted to deal with again, trying to find a lot of them. Same with shrines. So when I first played, I was doing shrines left and right, like I was just trying to find as many as I could. But a lot of the shrines don't really hold up. They have a cool puzzle mechanic, some of them are just combat, but they do kind of wear off faster than you would like, especially on a replay when I've already done most of these. I would say I spent the first half doing a lot of shrines just so I can have more health and more stamina. But after that, I kind of just walked past a lot of them. To their credit though, since there's so many, a lot of them I didn't remember and had to resolve the puzzles. So I actually do appreciate that, because it's not fun when you're doing a puzzle and you know exactly what to do. So there's other minor gripes, but not really gripes, because they kind of add to the game's immersion. Like rain, like we all remember the first time we tried to climb up a mountain while it was raining and you just kept slipping down. And on one hand, yeah, it's annoying, but on the other hand, it kind of adds to the immersion. Same thing when you would have your sword out and there'd be lightning and you just get struck. It adds a layer of realism that we've not seen anywhere in the Zelda series before this. And yeah, it is annoying. I've mentioned that a couple times, but there's something about it that just keeps you engaged. The enemy variety here is a little thinner than I remembered. You have Bokoblins, Moblins, Lizalfos, and different element variants. Wizrobes, Guardians, most camps are some version of the first three sitting around a fire, and then once you figure out your preferred method of clearing a camp, you're likely to go with that unless you want to change things up like me. The Lionels here are still tough even though I've played this game so much. So I will say that the difficulty in this game was actually one of my favorite parts, because it's not so ridiculously difficult like a Souls game where you're just going to be throwing your controller, but it's also not an easy game depending on how you play it. And Lionels and Guardians, especially early on, are just brutal. Hyrule Castle is one of the places this run reminded me to appreciate, because you can go to it from the start of the game. Some people actually do that. Some people literally get off the Great Plateau and just go right to Ganon, and that's just crazy to me. But I feel like that's also just not really appreciating the game. That's just trying to speedrun. Because for me, what makes this game so great, especially on a replay, is how the game just wants you to do whatever you want. Like, there's so many optional things, and you make your own experience out of it. Do you want to get the Master Sword? Do you want to go through those trials, which you do have to have enough health for? Or do you want to just skip that completely? Do you want to complete the 4 Divine Beasts? Do you want to get all the memories? Do you want to do a bunch of side quests? It all comes down to how you want to play it, and I think that's kind of why some people have very different perspectives on this. Now, another perspective is that this is not a traditional Zelda game. It does not feel like a normal Zelda game, because it isn't one. There's not items in the traditional sense where you have to find an item in a dungeon and use it to progress. There's no linearity here, and I know Zelda games get praised for their adventures, but almost all of them basically have you going from point A to point B in the story. And of course, Breath of the Wild does not do that. You can get the memories in any order, you can do the Divine Beast in any order, you can do side quests in any order pretty much. And if you don't like that formula, totally fine. I have some preferences with the traditional Zelda formula and things I like better in Breath of the Wild. And I think instead of just arguing about which one is better, we can try to appreciate both and just have our own personal opinions. But unfortunately, a lot of discussions about this do get heated, which I don't think there's any reason for. I think whatever you prefer in a video game is what you prefer, and it doesn't matter what someone else likes. With that being said, I do understand if someone's upset, because we haven't gotten a traditional 3D Zelda game for a long time. But tying back into that, on my replay, well, I didn't try to do everything everything I did in the first, I still wanted to do the Divine Beast, unlock all the memories, do a decent amount of side quests and shrines, and see if there were things that I just hadn't found before. And I don't know, I played this game 9 years ago now, so I don't remember everything. I don't remember if I did that specific shrine, or if I found that specific chest, or if I did that specific side quest. There's some of them I remember, and some of them I didn't. So I was kind of worried when going into this replay that I was just going to get bored because I already played this game and it's so long. But because there's so much, and I haven't played it for so long, that didn't really happen. I'd say my biggest complaint though was the Divine Beast. I struggled with them originally, because not only were the boss fights brutal, but the Divine Beast all look the same and are all just super confusing, and I just do not like them. It is my least favorite part of the game. I think another kind of weakness is the story. I don't think it's that great here. I think it's interesting to get the memories and learn what happened, but it also is limited, because since it's not a linear story where you go from point A to point B, it's just not going to have that sweeping epic Zelda story that you might want. But I guess that is a trade-off to have a game this open. I don't think any replay will ever come close to my first experience playing Breath of the Wild, because not only was it the discovery of playing it for the first time, but just also the time that came out, because as much as we want to say that nostalgia doesn't influence why we like a game, it still is a very big factor. Like, I was only 14 years old when this came out. It was the first console I got at launch. It was something that was hyped for years. It was Nintendo's most innovative console in years. It was just the whole atmosphere of the time. So while my replay didn't recreate that or anything, I still had a lot of fun, a lot more fun than I expected on my replay. And while I don't think anything changed too much, like I never liked the Divine Beast, I was never a big fan of the story, it still holds up really well. And also I just want to say that I did play this on my Switch 2, with the Switch 2 upgrade that I got with my Nintendo Switch Online subscription, and the performance and visuals were better. I don't think it made that big of a difference, but the original definitely could get choppy at times, so I did just want to mention that real quick. And now finally, we are at Tears of the Kingdom, which is nobody's intended experience to go from Breath of the Wild to Tears of the Kingdom, at least literally right after. So I got this game in launch in 2023, and that was already 6 years since I played Breath of the Wild. The opening here is a lot more cinematic than Breath of the Wild, but I don't know if I'd say it's better. Breath of the Wild, you see the world for the first time, and there's just something special about seeing this new version of Hyrule. Tears of the Kingdom has you with Zelda exploring some ruins and then reawakening Ganondorf. I actually really do like this opening though. You then wake up in a Sky Island with a new arm and you have no idea where Zelda is. So the beginning here has very similar vibes where you're high up and you can't get down until you complete some tasks. So of course you do what you need to do, you get your abilities, and immediately they're different here. Ascend is still super fun to use when you're under something and then you just go through the ground into the ceiling and go above it. It's just super satisfying. Rewind is as fun as ever, but Ultra Hand, I mean, you could do anything with this. You could grab seemingly any object in the world and just move it. And because the physics are so advanced here, and that's something I still have not gotten bored of. And then kind of linked with that is the fuse system, where you can combine pretty much everything. And it adds just a whole new layer to the gameplay that wasn't in Breath of the Wild. Also, of course, you can build anything here. Like, people have made ridiculous things. And now that I had more experience in this replay, it's definitely something that I experimented with and I'm still not very good at. But anyway, let's get to the world itself. So there's some more enemy variety here. It's not anything too drastic, but it does feel a little more varied here. The world is, of course, very similar to Breath of the Wild. Like, if you played Breath of the Wild, you will recognize this map. But that doesn't mean there's nothing new. There's, of course, new NPCs, new buildings, some new settlements, and of course caves where there's just a ton added. There's wells used to get to the caves, and they range from just a small area to something that you can actually explore for a little bit. And it's cool that you could actually track it, like there's a quest to try and find every single one. The world's of course also expanded with the Sky Islands, which there's a ton of, but something that wasn't even in the marketing and is crazy to me is just how there's a whole other world below, and Nintendo didn't even talk about it. Like, I literally had no idea what this was and randomly found it in the game, and that was just a huge discovery, and I'm honestly happy Nintendo didn't reveal that because it was just a shock. Now, are the depths the best part of the game? No, they're not my favorite. It does kind of get repetitive just trying to find the light routes. There's not much enemy variety. The gloom effect gets very tiring, but there are some things I liked about it, like finding the hidden treasure there, the hidden Yiga hideouts, because it just feels like these places have just been abandoned for so long and you're just discovering them for the first time in centuries, especially some of the more dungeon-like areas here. This game just feels very vertical because you go underground, you go on the ground, and then in the Sky Islands, and it's by far the most expansive Zelda game we've ever had. Like, it feels like Breath of the Wild on steroids. Then the temples here are actually a huge improvement over the Divine Beast. Like, I did not like the Divine Beast. I actually like the temples here. I don't think they're the best dungeons in the Zelda series, and I don't think they're particularly close to being the best, but they feel like more traditional Zelda dungeons than the Divine Beast. They don't play out the exact same. They have different aesthetics. And yeah, there's only 4 of them, but I think this is one of the biggest upgrades from Breath of the Wild to Tears of the Kingdom. Then after this, you get the Sage's powers. And while some of the powers are cool, since their physical avatars float near you at all times, you're going to accidentally activate their abilities, and this happened to me a lot of times. Not that big of a deal, but it's something that kind of stood out to me. The Dragon's Tears memories, I think, are better than Breath of the Wild's memories, because I think the mystery is just more interesting here. Like, you're trying to piece together what exactly happened and where Zelda is, and then when you finally get all of them and you realize it was actually a pretty big plot twist and something I just never would have expected. So I gotta say, I actually do like the story better here than Breath of the Wild, even though I think that might be a controversial opinion. And Ganondorf, while he isn't omnipresent in this game in the sense that you're gonna run into him multiple times, you learn a lot about him in the memories, and he's just very menacing here. The fight with him at the end is also one of the hardest fights in the Zelda series. This took me so long to complete, and I actually needed to go back because I had to get more sun shrooms. So I could go on a lot about Tears of the Kingdom, but a lot of the things I'm saying about it would be similar to Breath of the Wild. Yeah, you have the expanded abilities, the world is expanded, you have better dungeons, you have more side quests, you have more music. It is very much an expansion of Breath of the Wild, and a lot of people say it's a DLC, which I don't think is totally fair because that would probably make this the biggest DLC of all time. I think the problem with my playthrough was that since I played it right after Breath of the Wild, which still took me a lot of time on my replay, that it kind of made me want to go through this game faster because it does feel very similar. I already explored a lot of the world, I already got a lot of the same weapons, I fought a lot of the same enemies, so I didn't really enjoy my replay as much as Breath of the Wild. But at the same time, I don't think that's an issue with the game itself, because if you played these games when they came out, you're playing them 6 years apart. Like when I first played Tears of the Kingdom, I didn't have that issue because it had been so long and I was eager to get back into the world. But I still think that Tears of the Kingdom, in my personal opinion that you're probably going to disagree with, I like it better than Breath of the Wild overall. I like the abilities that they added. I like some of the changes that they made. I really actually did like the Sky Islands, even though they could have been a little more developed with a little more to do. But just the feeling of just jumping down into the world, gliding, just finding these structures in the sky was just super fun for me. People say Tears of the Kingdom is just Breath of the Wild with building, and I don't agree with that. I think this does change a lot of things and just adds enough new content to feel like its own thing, even if it is very similar at the same time. And this is honestly one of my favorite video games of all time, because even though it was still very similar and kind of brought down my replay a little bit just because it felt like going into a similar game right after, I don't really feel like that's fair to hold it against this game, because I remember my first experience playing this, how much I loved it, and how much I really took my time in it. With that being said, what changed for me in this? Not too much, because it's only been 3 years since I played this, so my opinions are pretty much the same. I'd say I probably like the depths a little less now, because even though I've never been a big fan of it, at least it had something going for it the first time I was there, but by this time, I just didn't really want to explore the depths that much. Some of the Sky Island puzzles can be annoying, where you have to use a ball, or you have to bring something to the shrine from far away. I think this is one of the hardest ones to give like a clean verdict on because of the context I played it in. So I would say if you're going to replay these games, give a lot of time in between. So I started playing the series when I was like 9 years old, I think, and I'm 23 now, and it's been a long time since I've replayed some of these. And I feel like it's kind of hard to judge these games more objectively because I have so many memories associated with them that no matter how hard I try, my nostalgia and my original thoughts towards these games is still going to affect how I feel now. But I was definitely able to notice more things here. It's like more story elements, more themes, appreciating the music more, appreciating the designs more, and also playing all 7 back-to-back, which took months. Like this was a multi-month project. It kind of removes the illusion. Like you're going to stop fearing the bosses you once dreaded. You're going to see the puzzle structure instead of just the puzzle. You'll notice pacing more. You'll notice repetition. And I don't think that's really the way to experience Zelda. I think the way to experience Zelda is letting the games really sink in more. Like being able to take your time and not worry about what you're playing next. What I can say though, whether it's my own nostalgia talking or not, is that I love every single one of these games. I think some of them have issues that I didn't really notice as much that I've went over in this video, and I think some of them have good things that I didn't really notice as much. I basically just tried to overview some of my thoughts for each game without going into every single nitty-gritty detail for each game, because then this video would be like 8 hours long. But all I would say is if I ever want to go replay all these games again, definitely going to take more time in between, but these are all fantastic games that if you have not played, I can't recommend enough. Now, if you made it to the end of this very long video, would really appreciate if you like and subscribe. Also consider joining my Discord. Also check out some of these Zelda videos here, and I'll see you next time.